Now that we have all the buildings unwrapped, what we got to do is we got to figure out how big our texture maps need to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to render out our animation at 720 486 in normal D1 res, but it would also be nice to have some high-res stills of this environment. So let's say that we're going to render 3000 pixels wide, which is going to turn out to be like 2250 tall. And so that means that this building alone right here, the bottom almost all the way to the top, that's got to be at least 2250. So we're looking at some pretty big texture maps here. But remember, it might be worse than that. What we need to do is check our actual camera that we're going to render out, because we're planning on using one texture for this entire wall. Trying to look at. Uh, the camera can see the bottom of the wall right here all the way up to the top here. And if we render this at 720 by 486 high, that means that from here to here, our texture map has to be at least 486 pixels. So if we take this and look at our editor here, that means from here to here, this distance is roughly 500 pixels. So if we keep going from here to here and then to here, that's 1K, and then it looks like overall that's going to be about 2K for the entire texture map. But to play it safe, it's actually better to go even higher than that. I think what we should do is use 3K textures, because you can always scale them down, but you can't scale them back up. So it'll be safer to make them huge and then scale them down if we don't need them that big. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how to export out some guides that you can use to paint over. To make our guide that we're going to use in Photoshop, what we'll do is we'll select this building and we'll isolate it. And then what I like to use is a text porter. And what we'll do is we're going to make 3K maps, so it's going to be 3096. And the settings I like to use is I'll turn off polygon fill, and I change this to constant, and I'll make this color white. Now when we select this object, we'll get the white lines of our edges on a black background. Now we'll take this and we're going to save it out with the same name that our building has, and I just put guide on the end, and that's just to help keep things organized later. So we'll save that and we'll go into Photoshop and we'll open that, and I'm going to select everything, copy it. I'm going to make a new image and I'm going to paste it into here. And now I'm going to name this guide, and I'll create a layer underneath it which I'm going to call base, and I'm going to make the base layer just black, so I'll fill that with black. And now the guide layer I'll set to linear dodge. And what that allows to do is when we drop in our textures in between here, we'll be able to see our guidelines on top of everything that we do. So that'll just help us to know where we're painting and what's going where. So the next thing we'll do is start putting black and white grime that we can apply to everything. We needed sort of a concrete area along the bottom here. It's kind of patched area, and so I think this could be used for that. And then I've just got some drips and stains and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and start. with our brick pattern here. Okay, and we'll just move it down here and zoom. Now let's take a look at our reference and let's just kind of figure this out. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 11 blocks to the top of the door. So let's just figure out what that needs to be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And it's actually somewhere right about where it was. Just right there. Okay. So now we'll take this and we're going to start duplicating it and filling up the area behind our guide. So I'm going to take this and we'll just bring some guides in here and I'll just copy it over. Okay, and we'll do it again and just one more time. And we're basically just going to fill this area underneath with this block pattern. We'll just fill the whole thing up. Okay, so we'll clear our guides and I'm going to desaturate this. And now we've got our blocks. So the next thing we'll do is we'll add sort of that general griminess to the whole thing. So I'll zoom out and I'll bring this in. And I'm going to set this to, let's try and multiply. And we'll just scale this up. And we'll adjust all this stuff so that it works as we go, but we'll just turn that down a little bit. And let's take this in and we'll scale this down and kind of move it into place. We'll make sure it wraps around this corner just in case we see a little bit of that. It's a little bit shorter. Let's check our reference. It's maybe only 3 blocks tall, which is fairly close to what we have. And it extends all the way to the end of this window. Okay, and I'll also desaturate that. Excellent. Alright. So the next thing I want to do is take a look in here and I'm going to add just a little bit of noise to everything. So I'm going to put this in, actually I'll put it beneath the concrete, and I'm going to fill this with sort of a medium gray. So we'll fill this layer. And then I'm going to apply some noise to it. That should be cool. And we'll change this to whatever works best. Multiply is no good. Let's kind of step through them and find which works the best. Hard light works fairly well. Let's go with that. Alright, so let's get some color in this thing. So let's take a look at our reference and let's find an image that shows that building well. This one. These buildings have a fairly recognizable sort of pattern to their color and griminess. So in order to match this, at least to some degree, what we can do is take an image, and actually let's put it into Photoshop, and we're just going to select this area and let's bring it in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to transform this until it kind of fits our UVs. So something kind of like this. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of clone out any areas that don't work. Let me undo that one. So we're just filling these in. We want to get kind of the overall feel for this without necessarily being 100% accurate. But when we look at the final rendered image, we want to recognize that this part back up, and we'll adjust it even more if needed. Okay, so we're going to put that on the very bottom, and we're going to change this to overlay, and we've got this one set to hard light, but let's try overlay on that and multiply here. And so what that leaves us with is sort of an approximation of the colors that were actually on that wall. And we can just kind of use this as our color and kind of mess with the other layers to make it look sort of right. So obviously this is a little bit intense, the grime here, so we can adjust that. And these actually seem okay. The grain might be a little bit strong, so we'll take that down. And we'll go in here and we want to, rough up this edge a little bit. So let's take a hard-edged eraser brush and we'll just kind of make this a little bit imperfect. Yeah. Something like that. Alright, and we're going to need some stains. So let's pull up the stains and we'll drop one of these in. And let's set it to, well actually hold on. First we'll get it into place and then we'll figure out what it should be. We'll put one right under the window here. And I'm just going to take this excess stuff and I'm going to move it over. And we'll find kind of an area that looks good for this one. Let's try that. So I'm going to take this, get rid of that, this part, and get rid of that. Okay, and bring this in again and pick a different section. Something like that. It's a little bit too big, so I'll scale it down like this. And I'm going to do the same sort of thing. I'll just grab the stuff we don't need. And let me zoom in so I can make sure I'm in the right spot here. Take that and get rid of that. And we've got this. Okay, so I just merged those all together onto one layer, and let's try color burn, and we'll turn it way down. We just want it to be sort of grimy and looks like stains that had dripped down. And then we'll take a brush, and I actually like to use this leaf brush for nice rough edges on stuff. And we'll just kind of paint out these hard edge lines. Just like this. This one's really bad, so get that one. And actually, this one's a little bit too strong, so I'm going to just adjust the levels on this guy. Let's try something more like that. And let's get rid of this edge. Maybe too much down here. And we'll keep messing with that, but let's see what this actually looks like in our scene. So we can say this is the JPEG texture. It's building 1, and I'm going to put diffuse on here because this is going to be our diffuse map. And now in Max, we'll apply this, and I'm going to give it the texture the same name as the object. It'll help us to find stuff later. So we're going to have a bitmap, and we're going to go to the Gonmon, and it was called building a diffuse, and we'll assign that onto our building. And next we'll just do a test render, and we'll just see how it looks so we have some idea of where we're going. And so when we render, this is what we get. And for just a really quick throw it together kind of attempt, this is not too bad a place to start. As you can see, the patterns are pretty much the same. You can definitely recognize that it is that same building. So we'll keep going with the texture and try and make it nicer. With a little bit more messing around, I added stronger stains across the top, this sort of dirt along the bottom, and just made some adjustments to the grain and painted in some areas that needed a little bit more work on our color layer. And with that, I think we've got a pretty decent map. So let's take it over back into Max and just check it, and we'll see how it looks. And so here's the result that we get with that update to the texture in Max. So I think this is probably pretty good, and we can go ahead and move on to the bump and other aspects of the texture. So I always like to get the diffuse figured out before I move on to anything else. So let's go back over to Photoshop and make the other bump and other channels. So to create our bump map, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer set, and I'm going to name this diffuse, and I'll pull this out here so we can see what we're doing. And it's going to put all of the layers that make up the diffuse texture inside this folder. And now what we'll do is we'll duplicate the layer set, and we'll call it bump. So I can turn that off, and now what we can do is adjust all of these layers until we get our bump map. And the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of turn everything off so that we're starting at the very beginning. And we'll just turn one thing on at a time and adjust it until it's right. So we need to have this sort of block texture. So we'll need to see the seams of that. And then we've got our noise, we'll keep that. The grime, we don't need to keep that, although it might be nice to have it in there just for some random variation. But what we'll do is, um, well, actually, you know what? Because that area of the diffuse map was darker, what we'll do is we'll leave it collects on the outside of the wall. So what we'll do is we'll change it to screen and invert it, and now I'll just brighten it up a little bit, and that'll set our dirt a little bit higher in this case. And bring it down. It's going to be fairly subtle. Come down to the bottom of the wall where we've got our dirt. I think that's probably fine the way it is. And we've got this. And actually, let's do it this way. And we'll go a little bit more. There, something like that. Okay, let's try that. And we'll just save this. And we're going to call this building A bump. And we'll head over to max. And we'll assign that in here. So I'm just going to copy this, go in here, and we'll select the bump map. So now we can kind of see that it is in fact working the way we want it to. And we'll do a test render and we'll see how this looks. And here's the result of that. Now you can see that we're getting sort of these indentations of where the grout of the brick would be. And this concrete piece here is sticking out a little bit. So I think this is overall fairly effective, and we can keep tweaking it as we go and just keep making it better. I mean, at this stage, you want to remain pretty flexible and you want to experiment and try and figure out what's going to work best for you. So what I'd like to do is try and just throw in diffusion on this, and what we'll do is come in here and I'm going to change this over to Orange or Blend, the roughness to 0, and I'm just going to copy our diffuse map into our diffuse level, and as you can see that made it a lot darker. But what we want to do is take a look at our texture here, and we're going to adjust the output. Just kind of bring this to maybe something like that. And I don't know, we'll see what it does. And here's the rendered result that we get from adding the diffuse level map. Um, Now, copying your diffuse texture into your diffuse level is not necessarily the ideal way to create a diffusion map, but in this case, I think it'll work just fine. What the diffuse level map is doing is it's taking areas that are darker, and those areas of the map are absorbing more light than the lighter areas. So the reason that our wall looks darker now overall is because the values that we have here are affecting how much light actually bounces back. So that is why it looks darker. So now, depending on what the overall mood of the final shot was going to be, I might go in and paint a specular map for this, but since it's just a daytime sort of dry scene, nothing's wet, you can probably get away without doing a specular map on this. Um, so I'm going to try without, and we'll just see how it goes. And if we need to add it, then we will. But I would go from this point and make the rest of the textures for the other buildings that were similar to this. And all you need to do is go into Photoshop, find another photo that shows the other buildings, drop it in there as your color, and then bring in your new guide and make sure that all your drips and stains and everything are in the right place for the other buildings. And you've just saved yourself a ton of time. Instead of painting a whole brand new texture, you can just reuse the stuff.